Well, it's lovely to be here and lovely to be with you all. The worst thing about coming on last is that everybody said everything you want to say. So I've jettisoned of what I actually prepared for you, and I'm doing something completely different, which is about flower arrangement. That's a joke. So what I'm going to do instead is actually pivot and position everything I'm saying in the context of three main stories of encounters I've had with seriously traumatized people. And that's in the further context of an enveloping issue about violence against women, but also some of the issues that were brought up in the book. So, where do we start? I don't want to spend a lot of time on provisional things, but just making sure that this actually works. Yes, we'll go back to Boxing Day 2004, when, if you remember, a series of very large tsunami waves up to about 3 meters high were created by the underwater seismic activity. And communities all along the surrounding coast of the Indian Ocean were incredibly seriously affected. The tsunamis killed an estimated nearly 228,000 people in 14 countries and wrecked the lives of millions. Millions remained traumatized after the tsunami had gone, after the redevelopment had happened, and all the rest of it. And so my first story really is about the communities that we visited in 2007. The first thing I want to ask is, how do we engage with the issue itself theologically? And this is one way of engaging with it, asking the question, so where was God when all this is happening? How is it that God has created a universe where tsunamis happen? Where there are possibilities of tectonic plates not working or working against each other. I leave the scientists and theologians to work that out for themselves and then impart their advice to us. This is John Polkinghorne, whom we greatly value in our culture and our country. He's a lovely man. I worked with him a lot and travelled with him a lot. He's a dapper little man with a brain like a razor blade. And this is what he's actually, he's a physicist, but he's also a theologian. Modern science has come to recognise that the processes that can give rise to genuine novelty have to be at the edge of the chaos, where order and disorder, chance and necessity creatively interlace. Otherwise, things are either too rigid for anything really new to happen, or too haphazard for novelty to be able to persist. Hence, there's an inescapable shadow side to great fruitfulness. He says this is the universe that God has made, where we are co-creators with God on the ongoing dynamics of that universe, and there is an inescapable shadow side. The intrinsic unpredictables and unpredictabilities of quantum mechanics and chaos theory can be seen theologically as gifts of a creator whose creation is both orderly and open in this way. I was with him in Canada, where he was being hosted by the physics department in the university, and I was doing things in sociology and philosophy. I went along to his lecture, which was in a tiny little room, and suddenly swarms of people from all parts of the university came rushing in to listen to him. So we moved to a bigger room, and then a bigger still room, and eventually we had a massive room with everybody there, and I saw this group of very, very cynical-looking, skeptical physicists and scientists who came because he's a person you come and listen to with respect, but we're not going to be convinced. About halfway through his lecture, they'd all got notepads out and were scribbling as fast as they possibly could, and the debate afterwards was electrifying. That's all I can say. So that's one way of dealing with it theologically, getting into that kind of debate where we draw on quantum physics, we draw on arguments outside theology, we look at the nature of the reality with philosophical issues, and we batter them around. There are other ways of dealing with it theologically, and I want to focus on those myself. One way, what we found was when we went to different parts of the tsunami and the Indian Ocean, we found that people's experiences were vastly different from each other. So how you relate theologically to trauma and to things that you are way out of control depends really on how that trauma is itself experienced. We went to South India first, and fascinating, this was now in 2007, you can see the devastation is still there, but there's lots of rebuilding, boats are back, fishermen are starting again, And there's an optimism and hope, enthusiasm there. And that was very strongly attached to the Christian community that formed itself around this little bit of the Indian Ocean. It's a Catholic community, and a priest headed up this community, a delightful, lovely man. Very well, you can't see him, he's crept off the photograph. Who had an incredible vision for egalitarian relationships, and actually scotched the dowry and all kinds of things. I mean, he was an amazing man. I could tell you half a dozen stories from him, but I haven't got the time. But he was up halfway up the tower in his big Catholic church on the top of the hill, praying and getting ready for Mass the following day, looked out of the window and saw the tide going out. And it went out and out. And he said he felt cold all over because he knew what would happen when it came back in. He looked down and he realised that the fishermen on the seafront would not see it, the people would not see it, because a wall had been erected to make sure that the whole village community was safe from stray floods and waves and so on. So he began to ring the bell. And he tolled the bell and tolled the bell and tolled the bell. And of course the locals knew there was no Mass, there was no wedding, there was no funeral, but the priest was tolling the bell. Everybody dropped everything they had, rushed up the hill, packed into the church, by which time the wind was howling and blowing. They battened down anything that they could batten down, and then waited out the tsunami. When the tsunami had been and gone, and they looked back and went down into the village and the community again, everything was utterly destroyed. No houses were standing, the boats had gone, were wrecked all along the beaches, and there was total devastation, but not a single life was lost. And they put it down to God's intervention through the faithfulness of the priest, through the love of that community, that they had been saved. And the effect of that was actually to reduce the trauma that each of them felt, and to transfer that trauma into praise, into worship, into adoration, into thankfulness and thanksgiving, but also into quite deep compassion for those who had lost everything in the tsunami. And it was wonderful to go to that community and experience all of that, in that, being bathed in the love and gratitude of that community, because something else was going to happen when we moved on. We then went to Sri Lanka. The first tsunami waves had initially caused a small flood along the Sri Lankan coast. And then moments later, the ocean floor was exposed to as much as 1 kilometre, actually, as the tide went out. So you had this vast area, as far as the eye could see, of nothing but kind of sandbanks where the sea should be. And because of the drawback, the negative wave, the second wave in was the massive tsunami wave, which was going to shatter everybody's lives. Going to Sri Lanka was a different issue from going to South India, because to start with, we had to deal with Sri Lankan politics. The Tamil Tigers and the government were locked into mortal combat, a disagreement, and it was very hard to actually move people on. We were now 2.5 years later, and very, very little had changed. What were we doing there? Well, we were going to discover how money had been used from the UK in the rebuilding in Sri Lanka, to check whether or not the accommodation was as it should be, to make sure that there was hygiene, there was proper removal of rubbish and so on, and whatever poor conditions people were living in, it was copable. But what was very evident to us was that people were stuck, and they had been stuck there for 2.5 years, and they continued to be stuck, and they knew that they hadn't moved on in a whole range of ways. And we went with an interpreter who had taken many, and was constantly taking NGO personnel to this region. And he knew all the questions that agencies wanted to ask, and he plied us with these questions, and he also translated all the answers. And there was something very ritualistic about it, very predictable, very kind of ordinary. Yes, the bins had all been emptied. Yes, the leaks had been stopped. Yes, the holes had been repaired. Yes, they had enough food. There was regular water coming into the community. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for all that you're doing. It was actually scary just to listen to that kind of emptiness of their responses. Our job, therefore, was to reassure them that we would continue to work, that we would have representations with their government and with agencies, humanitarian agencies, and move things on a bit. We talked to the constructors, we listened very carefully at their plans, and we knew that all was simply not well. This is the houses that we were offering them. They'd already been built somewhere else, and we were very proud of them. We took pictures, we assured them that sooner or later they would be in houses like that. I smiled at one of the women who tagged along the whole way and was there at my elbow all the time. She looked back at me, making full eye contact, unsmilingly. "I can move to another house," she said, through the interpreter, "but I cannot move on. My heart is still beneath the wave." And despite her complete calmness, absolute calmness as she said this, I saw the trauma etched right across her face. And in that instant, I knew that God wanted far more of us in our visit than merely checking on the bins and the water supply and the holes in the roofs. I immediately had a discussion with the people who were organising our visit, and I said it would be good to spend a little time longer. They're keen on this at all. I asked them how much therapeutic help had been made available for the people in this particular transit camp. They looked at me with amazement. "It's not our job to provide therapists," he said. We haven't got the funds. There aren't any therapists. No, we haven't had therapists here. What would we do? We are looking after the practical needs of these people and keeping them safe. This is a war situation here in Sri Lanka. Well, therapy is a long, long way from where we are. Two of the women overheard the conversation. They disappeared. They came back. They talked to the interpreter. The interpreter came over to us and said, "The people in the community would like a meeting with the president of Tear Fund." The organisers were horrified. No. She hasn't got time. She's got a whole stream of people waiting for her in another place and so on. I made an executive decision. I would like to have a meeting with the people in the community because they have been so well looked after by you. You have done such a splendid job in meeting their material needs. It has to be recorded properly. I have to hear this from them and put it all down so that I can write a good report when I get back, and we are very grateful for everything you've done. They looked mildly okay and said, "Okay, you can have a meeting, but it has to be fairly fast." So we went, we had a meeting, and these are the women who kind of organised it. You can see oh yes, that's, and it reminded me immediately of referring to that. People keep telling us, this was Shelley Rambo when she was quoting from this deacon in New Orleans. People keep telling us to get over it already. The storm is gone, but the after the storm is always here. The after the storm was there for 2.5 years. It wasn't going anywhere, and it was bunched, and there had been no help in actually meeting the after the storm. And the life after the storm is continuously marked by the ongoings of death. This ongoingness, the return, is the enigma of traumatic suffering. And I knew very well that what we were going to be doing was actually somehow or another tackling that or encountering it, and of course it was difficult to know whether we had the resources to do it in a very short time available. We could be easily out of our depth, we were out of our depth. Could we make things far worse for the people that we were now going to listen to? Nevertheless, we had our meeting. I was afraid, I have to say, because I really didn't want to let them down. The first thing I noticed when we had the meeting, these are the women who came with me to organise it, was that most of the people under the canopy, apart from the translators wearing the white shirt, were either very young men or women. Older men, middle-aged men, were absent completely. I pointed this out to them, that most of the people in the transit community were women. And yet, most of the people who survived the tsunamis were men. So this was a strange ratio. Why was it that the women had survived in this community, whereas predominantly the men had survived because they could get away first? It was very interesting how they responded. One woman, the one I just pointed to, in the yellow shirt, said, "My husband died on the waterfront. Our husbands were all fishermen. They were mending their nets." The one on my right said, "I lost my husband, I lost my oldest son, I lost my 2 brothers and 3 cousins and an uncle in the tsunami." And very quickly, everybody started to speak, hesitantly at first, and I said, "And how was it? How was it? I don't even know what happened when you were there." And they began to tell me how it was. Extraordinary, what I heard through the interpreter. The interpreter was shocked. You could see he went into a state of shock even as he was translating their comments. It was like a torrent. And what I found were fragments of feeling, visual images, sounds of the howling wind, men's voices screaming at them, the crashing waves, panic of running, getting the children together, watching people die as they were trapped, and running up the hill all at the same time. And it was very difficult to try and hear what I was hearing from this cacophony of voices, where there wasn't a single narrative, there wasn't a beginning, a middle and end. There were just feelings transmitted in these incredibly graphic ways. The interpreter's voice became very urgent. His face was shocked. His words were tripping over one another, and you could see he was entering into the trauma of the women as they relayed their stories. And it wasn't even stories, they were fragments. So out of this fragmented cameo of fear and horror, I put together the narrative of that day for them. The men had been on the seafront, mending nets. The tide came in, it was massive. Then it went out, and out, and out, and out. And the men knew what that meant. The returning wave would bring death on a massive scale. And in that situation, men just normally drop everything and run for their lives. But these men didn't. These men realized that they needed to get their wives and children to safety. So they stopped mending their nets, they turned around, they shouted up the hill. The wives were in huts, some of them were just doing things together, some of them were reading to their children. Nobody was looking at the sea. And they started shouting the names of their wives and children till they came out and identified themselves. And then they screamed, "Run, run, get the children, get the mothers, run, get as high as you can at the top of the hill, run now." And the women just gathered the children together, and the elderly as much as they could, and dragged them up the hill. And then the stories became incredibly painful. One woman told me how she suddenly realized her oldest son was down with the fishermen, down at the bottom, and she had to get in before she moved the others. But how could she do that? What would she do with the other children? There was her sister, but her sister had twin babies and 2 others. How could she cope with 8 children to get them to the top? And she stood there rooted to the spot, unable to move, completely traumatized, and then ran and screamed for her oldest son, who appeared from nowhere and laughed at her and said, "Don't worry, Mum, I can get to the top of the hill long before you can." And she breathed a sigh of relief, picked up her other children and went. And that was the last she ever saw of him. And all of these fragments of trauma, of pain, of anguish, were just pouring out from these women as they came. And of course the tide came back in. And it was exactly as predicted, by which stage the men knew they couldn't get to the top of the hill. They couldn't get out of the way of the tide. And so they did what they always did in that occasion. They went to the clump of enormous palm trees and shunted up the palm tree like nobody's business to the very top, so that they could see the tide below them and the water below them, but they would be out of harm's way. But this tsunami was not like all the other tsunamis, and the huge palm trees were just snapped off like matchsticks, and every one of them died. As the women were telling me all of this, it was no longer an event in the past, no longer a recall of memory. It was happening right in front of us. And it was that suspension of time. It was that plunging back. It was that memory that never went away. It was that holding up life on hold. They were still there. And the thing is that they had not told this story to one another. They had not told it to anybody since the Boxing Day of 2004. So all that had been stored inside them, all that time just came pouring out, bit by bit, a huge welter of emotion. And I could feel the panic, I could feel the horror, I could experience with them the fear that the water would be with us and actually the men would be gone. And the terror of it all was unmistakable. What was interesting was just the sense of God-forsakenness in that experience of death. I felt the fear in my own body as they spoke. I felt the terror running up and down my spine. I felt the pain in my head as I battled with the windows and trying to get the children together and run up. And I too became, in a sense, part of the unreality of listening to the story of trauma. I didn't know what I was hearing, whether I was hearing or seeing it or caught up. It was extraordinary, the whole process. We spent a long time on this. I can't remember how long. I just remember the extraordinary experiences I had. But having given up, of course, the precious life-saving minutes and watching their husbands die, we got to the point where the story and the sharing stopped. And then there was silence, incredible silence after the pain of all of this sharing. And I didn't know what to say. I was in shock. They were all in shock. We were kind of in collective shock together. And then I wondered, was this the right thing? Was it at all sensible to have this encounter with these women, knowing now, as I did, that they had not told these stories ever before. They had just experienced it. They'd not heard one another before. They'd not rehearsed it to one another before. They had each been stuck in their own trauma. I had to say something. I said, "You have lost so much." One woman said, "We lost everything." Another woman said, "Except our memories before the wave. We had nice families. We had happy families." And then suddenly something else happened. They started to tell me about their families, about their celebrations, about birthday parties, about who had had a baby and when. And then someone cheerfully said to me, "Would you like to see some photographs?" I breathed the most enormous sigh of relief. "Yes, please, that would be fantastic. We could now move quickly from trauma to recovery," thinks I. So they sent their girls inside their mud huts to bring the photographs out. They brought the photographs wrapped in cloth with ribbons on them, and they plonked them. I was sitting here, they put them on my lap. The pile got higher and higher. And I started to, the woman in yellow didn't go, she just sat with me. She looked very, very gloomy, very sad indeed. She hadn't brightened up at all. I opened the first pack of photographs, ready to say, "Oh, aren't they beautiful, happy people?" And I had the most horrendous shock. I looked at a corpse of a little girl, aged about 11, with matted, seaweeded hair, torn clothes, stones up her nose, and a big stick on her lapel that said 733. All the photographs were of corpses, dead, lifeless people taken in the morgue. And then I got the point. This was all they had left. The wave had simply taken everything, even their photographs. And at that point, I lost it. I just burst into tears. I couldn't cope anymore. These were really lovely people, coping with all that trauma, and nobody really had actually reached out and helped them. And all they had left were corpse photographs. And I just sobbed. You don't do that if you're president of an aid organisation. It's really, really bad protocol. And I looked up and the translator was crying and all the women were crying. And this woman on my right said, "I would like to show you a photograph too." And she disappeared and brought back this photograph with a gilded frame, gold. And inside was the most horrible picture I have ever seen in my life of her husband. And the expression on his face was shock, horror, fear, anxiety, trauma, death. It was moments before the wave hit him, and his face was transfixed like that when he got to the morgue. And I just carried on crying. And we just wept. We wept together in an extraordinarily lengthy period of time. And I don't know how long we were there for. The organisers are gone. I didn't think they couldn't cope with me, they couldn't cope with the women, they couldn't cope with any of us. We were just in tears together. But there was something incredibly strong about sharing the tears. And the women were putting their arms around one another and whispering to one another and stroking one another's faces. And little children who had no memory of the tsunami were running up to their mothers and their aunties and hugging them. And there was that incredible release of emotion and sharing and love. And I realised what we were doing on this secular way was somehow reaching out and actually bringing into that situation. Oops, Daisy, sorry. The reality of God's love with us. This was a sculpture of the tsunami. I love it. A hand reaching out to another hand to try to find safety in the wave. It's a powerful image, but actually it's not the only powerful image that was there. What happened next was probably something that's completely unscripted and completely unexpected from my perspective. Because I suddenly realised that what we were doing was experiencing something like the sharing of the power of God for love communicated with one another. We were more in touch with our humanity, more in touch with our feelings, but also more in touch with the love of God than we ever had been since I arrived that morning. It was extraordinarily powerful being there with the women, listening to their stories, sharing their pain, weeping together. And I realised that what was happening, that Jesus was filling the silence, filling the space of God-forsakenness with his love. There was no doubt about it. That's precisely what we were doing. We were all tapping in to the God who loved every single one of those people and wanted to bring them healing and was going to bring them healing in one way or another. And I mentioned this. I mentioned that you have husbands who have given their lives that you will be safe. That puts me in touch with my own spiritual faith more than anything I could tell you. I want to tell you how grateful I am for hearing your stories today, because it's given me a greater gratitude and the love of your husbands. They look curious. Why is that? Says one woman. And I said, because I believe in a God, the God that Christians worship is the God whose Son died that we might live. Your husbands have died that you might live. And that puts me in touch with the spiritual reality in a way that few other things, other stories could do that. And we talked about God quite openly, quite unabashedly. One Catholic woman was very, very straightforward. I've always known that, she said. I've always known that my husband was Jesus to me on the cross when he went into the tsunami. And she began to cry again, and people were hugging her. And the organisers were saying, I'm sorry, you really need to leave. You have to leave within the next 10 minutes because the queues of people we are now can't be responsible any longer for holding you up. And I said, fine. And I said to them, please tell the group that I must leave. You do it for me because it's so rude to run away at this stage. So they explained that Elaine must leave, she has other people to see, and they did it in such a stern way that I had to say it myself in the end anyway. I don't want to go. I really want to spend far, far more time with you. And I will go, and I will be praying for you as I go. Because all that I've heard, what makes me want to bring you to God more and more, so that God can fill you with hope for the future, and you will not be locked in this place of pain. And this Catholic woman said, well, if you're going to pray as you go, why don't you pray whilst you're here? That makes more sense. So I said, but I can only pray if you want me to pray. It's not my role to be praying with you as the head of an NGO. And they all chorus, we want you to pray, we want you to pray. So I began to just pray. I prayed that the Holy Spirit would come and visit us as God had already visited us on that occasion, and would just sweep us with a sense of his love and protection, and would give us hope. More than anything, would give us hope that we would survive this day and the next, and we would be taken into a new future, a new healing, and new help. And then, this is what was so extraordinary, there was a wave of prayer from almost everybody under the tent. From Hindus, from Christians, from Catholics, from people who had no faith, just praying to the God whose Son died that we might live. And placing their prayers so incredibly enthusiastically, until I found somebody tugging at my elbow and said, the car is now waiting for you, unless you go now. And we parted. The women and the boys and the children ran all the way out of the community. They ran for half a mile at least, following us and cheering and singing to us as we left. It was the most extraordinarily profound experience. What was it about? How did we engage theologically? Curiously enough, not in many words. We engaged because we allowed God to fill the space, God's self. We allowed the Spirit of God to tell us what to do. We allowed the Spirit of God to speak to individual hearts there and just to open them up. Not deliberately. Nothing was kind of constructed. I wasn't expecting this. It took me really by surprise. And that's why I knew that actually God was at work. What happened to that community? Well, they're all rehoused. They're all doing quite well. Where are they spiritually? I have absolutely no idea. I've not gone back. I've not visited them. And you know what? It's not my business. It's the business between them and God. But I do believe that what happened there was incredibly significant. I must move on because I've got lots of other stories to tell you. I found that writing this book about violence against women, and this is a story I've just told you which is completely different from all the others I want to tell you, meant that asking the question of where are people traumatized most? What traumatizes us? And the answer is a very, very complex, complicated answer. But I did find that if you take the mythical concept of a global woman and ask where is trauma likely to occur in the big sweep of things, not in the individual personality of a single person, but in the big cultural sweep of things, it's likely to occur right across the whole lifestyle and life cycle. Starting from selective abortion in India, going on to female genital mutilation, the most barbaric, horrendous process of cutting up a girl's genitalia so that she will never have sexual pleasure, so that she always knows her sexuality belongs to her husband. And the brutalizing force stays with women for the rest of their lives. I know because they tell me. Child brides, being a bride of a man who is going to beat you, who is going to be you're going to be in subjection to him, and the trauma of actually losing your childhood, losing your education, losing your future, again puts them into a no-hope situation. Honour killings. The fear of stepping out of line with your family because if you do, you're likely to undergo honour attacks and you could be killed. And the trauma of living in that situation, living in fear because you know that sooner or later, if you step out of line, the problems will be yours. Intimate partner violence, something that happens in every community. And there are women I could introduce you today, and those of you who are counsellors will know them anyway, whose lives are actually dislocated so much because the reality that they present is not the reality that lives inside their bodies or their heads, and they're out of touch with the reality that surrounds them. Trafficking and prostitution will form my next story. Rape, sexual violence in war, and so on. All of these, just a quick cameo of pictures. This is FGM, often performed on minors. This is Hibo, whom I work with. She's a Somalian Muslim who finally wrote her own book called Cut, where she describes the trauma of being cut at the age of 6 and how she didn't even know what was happening to her or what had happened to her until she was 28. And then she realised. And then her life starts to make sense. She's an extraordinary survivor and actually is a real leader of communities, but she gets an awful lot of brickbat because of that. But the process of FGM is so brutal. And child brides, the horrible process of pregnancy, losing your childhood, becoming... here we have Narazali, who is, again, an incredibly powerful woman from Zimbabwe who has given her life to actually correct the whole issue of child brides and for calling out the trauma that little girls go through when they're there. Honour killings. Stoning is still alive and well. I don't know whether you know that. Even as we speak, women will be being stoned because of misdemeanours, because they're suspected of adultery, because they've been talking to a man at the well who wasn't their husband and so on. You don't have to prove adultery. You don't have to prove anything, you just have to suspect it. And you have grounds for actually honour killings or honour attacks. Intimate partner violence goes on everywhere, including acid attacks, and trafficking and prostitution. Just extraordinary. And I want to now move on to my second story. Our second story starts many, many years before the tsunami, and we go back to the 1940s, really. And we talk about the comfort women. I was in South Korea, trying to catch up with what was happening to women who had been seriously traumatized during the last war and beyond then. So Lee Ok-seun was running an errand for her parents when a group of uniformed men burst out of a car, attacked her, dragged her into a vehicle, and she was 14. She never saw her parents again. She lived in Busan, where I went to stay to find out more about these women. And the teenager was taken to a so-called comfort station, a brothel that serviced Japanese soldiers in Japanese-occupied China. What the Japanese did is that they picked women from the Philippines, from Korea, and from many of the other outposts of the Japanese Empire, and actually kidnapped them and put them in brothels where they serviced men, often something like 33 a day, some of the women told us, and became one of the tens of thousands of comfort women subjected to forced prostitution between 32 and 45. We went to visit the remaining comfort women who got back to Busan. I don't know how many left, 200,000, 300,000, fewer than 200 were back. Most of them died whilst they were out there. Many committed suicide, and the ones who came back were really in an extremely bad way. Approximately 3/4 of the comfort women died. Most survivors were left infertile due to sexual trauma or sexually transmitted diseases. We got to meet and talk to and spend a couple of days with the remaining survivors in Busan. Here is one of them, a wonderful, lovely woman, and a Christian woman, which was quite extraordinary. Most of the women were not Christians. Most of them had no way whatsoever of actually tapping into anything that was spiritual or hopeful or salvific in terms of their trauma. They had been so traumatized that their whole bodies were now taken over by traumatic memories and so on. These are what they showed us, the photographs of them when they were there, often pregnant. Sometimes, in terms of their pregnancy, they would throw themselves off buildings. The Japanese often ripped their wombs open and took the babies out and bayoneted them and so on. Horrendous experiences. And this sense, what you were really experiencing as you listened to them were those who had living in the suspended middle territory between death and life. Their lives had ended when they were taken away from Korea. And again, trauma wasn't a narrative with an orderly beginning, middle and end. Again, there was this patchwork, this mosaic of experiences, anxiety, fear, remembering incidents, remembering single men who were brutal to them, some who were kind to them, but remembering the trauma of having to undergo all of this. One woman just breaking down, and this we're talking about something 50, 60 years ago, and yet it was almost as if it was yesterday. Most of the survivors were now in their 80s. They had never been able to have children. They were now called the halmoni, as a mark of respect, the grandmothers. But of course they would never be grandmothers because their possibility of fertility was finished. The women felt that their lives had long been over, and the denial and silence was still to be broken. In their constant recital of the trauma that had destroyed their lives, many of them found it difficult, in fact impossible, to let in things from the outside that could potentially be salvific. I'm telling this story not because of the comfort women, but because of one of the group I was with. You see the girl under the woman under the poster. There were two people there. There's a Japanese journalist with his arms folded, and next to him was a Japanese Christian woman from a church, and she was a delegate to this group. And this woman, the comfort woman, was telling what it was like to be the subject of beatings, rape, of atrocities day by day under the Japanese soldiers. This girl started to move away. I'm just behind Nyada, you can't see me, and she started to move backwards, further and further away from the group. And I moved with her, further from the group. and said to her, "You must find this terribly painful." And she said, "They never told us. I never knew. Nobody ever mentioned this. I had no idea what we produced during the war. I had no idea what we put people through. They should have told us." She was angry with her government, but she also was in shock, in trauma, at listening to this and sharing the trauma shared by this woman. But I wasn't the only woman who'd noticed that she was struggling with the pain of listening to these stories. So the comfort woman also, the harmony, had watched her. And as the two of us were talking, she came over and greeted her in Japanese, and then began to speak to her in Japanese, and I melted away and looked back to find that the Japanese woman had her head on the harmony's shoulder, and the woman was speaking into her ear, whispering things, just lovely things. Afterwards, I said, "You seem better now." And she said to me, "You are not my enemy. You are my sister. You are my sister in the Lord Jesus Christ. And the Lord has filled the silence with his love. The Lord has been here ministering to you and to me through each other. Let's go in peace." Amazing story of reconciliation and healing for both of them, actually. The Japanese woman, but also the traumatized comfort woman. She saw the pain of the oppressor, the pain of oppression in the oppressor's face, and actually discarded it and went for healing. There's many people, Christians across the world, working for and against prostitution, both forced prostitution and so-called career prostitution. I'm part of them in our own country. The women who are working with them are getting younger and younger. There are more and more comfort houses all over the country, really, especially in England, and I don't know what's happening in Scotland. We have these gatherings which are very artistic gatherings, very encounter gatherings, musical. There's no kind of set speeches or anything, but we get a lot done during the times that we're together. And then we go on to the other things on that diagram: the rape culture, the issues of rape, and the way in which the trauma of rape stays with women long after the bruises have gone, and the stigma of rape, and how you can actually find yourself after the rape is finished. "I lost my identity," says a woman I was talking to. "Completely lost my identity. I became somebody else, and I don't know who that somebody else is. But I know it's not me, and I don't know how to get back to myself. I'm way back there before the rape ever happened." And that again is the whole area. Theo van der Velde, somebody's put me in touch with his books on shame, and that I want to thank you for that, because I spent last night reading them, one of them, and it was a very helpful book on this whole area of rape and sexual abuse. We're told to forgive and forget. I couldn't forgive and I couldn't forget. And I realised I have a right to remember and leave the forgiving to a higher being. I think being in touch with rape survivors, again, brings a reality into life, but it's also it brings an understanding of trauma. My final story then is from the Congo. Congo is the most brutal country I've been to in Africa. There was a war when I went last, and these are Congolese orphans. I don't know if you've been to Africa or if you frequent with African children. They are wonderful. African kids are absolutely gorgeous to be with. They run up to you, they want to touch your white skin, they want to handle you, they want to hold your blonde hair and so on. And they always try their English out to you. So they'll run up and say, "And how are you today?" And you say, "I'm fine." "And how are you?" And they say, "I'm fine." And then they giggle like mad and run off, and the next one comes up, "And how are you today?" And there's this wonderful dialogue that you have. These four little minds were completely different. Couldn't even get them to smile at me. They were looking in the middle distance. They're not even connected with themselves. And I spoke to Mama Jen, who ran the orphanage, and said I had never seen African children who can't smile. She was so angry with me. Angry. "Elaine, what do they have to smile about? Their parents were butchered in front of their eyes. Their mothers had their stomachs cut open. Their sisters were raped. Their fathers had their lips cut off. They saw it all. We are trying our hardest to find some place of healing for these minds. How do we do it? If you've got any advice for us, please let us know. Then we'll smile. I felt about this high, and she was absolutely right. Try to remark about the children. You can see the traumatization in their faces, especially if you're used to seeing African children. They're trying to make sense of life. What is life about? What is pain about? What is reality about? Who are they? Where are my parents? What happened to them? Why? Why did it happen? Please fill the void with some answers that we can grasp. My whole experience of the Congo was something very much like that, and especially the way in which women are targeted in war situations, and they are traumatized. Women are 80% of all refugees and displaced persons. Rape and sexual violence targeting women and girls are routinely used not only to terrorize women, but as strategic tools of war and instruments of genocide. I haven't got time to go into all the reasons why rape is a weapon of war, but it makes sense. You can think about it for yourself. If you can impregnate that generation of women with your offspring, then that's a quick way of eradicating a whole people group. But also it's humiliating the men as you rape them in front of their eyes and then shoot them or shoot the men. They're horrendous. It's cheaper than bullets, but the trauma involved in so many of these areas is unbelievable. I want to talk about that, but I don't. I was visiting Heal Africa in Goma, a Christian hospital that had been servicing everybody during the war, especially men. And then about 12, 13 years before, well, five or 6 years before I visited, they realized they were doing nothing for traumatized women, because somehow that just slipped the net. I had already been to a group in Baraka in the lakes and had an argument about sexual violence, which the head of police said didn't exist in the Congo. We have no sexual violence, they said. And there was the most incredible discussion as to the reality of that statement. Hearing in Goma, it was evident there was sexual violence. So they had decided that they must do something. They would offer operations. They would also offer counselling facilities. They would work with trauma victims. They would do anything that they could to get these women back on their feet and back in touch with reality, back in touch with their own bodies, back in touch with God in an affirming and healing kind of way. And they were working incredibly hard. They put up a notice after a prayer meeting that anyone who had undergone sexual violence would present themselves at the clinic, the hospital in Goma, at 8 o'clock on Monday morning. They began their prayer meeting at 6 o'clock. They wondered if anyone would show up. By 7 o'clock, they said they could hear the women coming because Goma was a place where there had been a volcano and there was asphalt everywhere. By 7:30, they could smell them coming because they came with ruptured bladders and prurient wounds and bleeding and so on. And they had to shut the doors at 8 o'clock because they could no longer cope with the barrage of people. When I was there, they still had this campus ward. They were recovering to a bed. I can find that from the fistula operations. I took that photograph. That wasn't the photograph I wanted. The photograph I wanted was where the women were so grateful, having come out of anaesthetic, that they believed that their healing would now happen and that they could get on with their memories and the rest of life. They were blessing each other. They were pouring love into one another. They were praying for one another, and that's the photograph I wanted. So I said, please may I take your photograph? And they said yes, and then went all formal on me, which was a great shame. But I couldn't say, please do what you were doing a minute ago, because that would have staged it quite wrongly. I'll come back to that in a minute. Whilst I was being shown around in this hospital, this is the reason I'm telling the story, the Congolese doctor, one of the surgeons, a lovely professional woman, constantly was looking over her shoulder at the doorway. And I realised that people were being brought in all the time, and they were in a bad state. And suddenly she gave this enormous wail. I can only describe it as a wail. And the nurse who was with us ran with her, and then came back to me and said, they have just brought in the 17-year-old girl who is the music leader in this woman's church, in the doctor's church, and she has been gang raped, and she is in an extremely bad way. She said, we will follow to see if there's anything we can do. So I went to this open door, and I looked in, and there was the doctor on a chair that rocked, And inside the doctor had her arms around this girl who was literally tucked inside the doctor's body. And they were rocking backwards and forwards like this. And the rhythm of the rocking, every rhythm, provided a beat. It was a beat for this girl to say one word over and over again, and the word was pourquoi, 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 pourquoi. Why? Where was God? Why? Why did this happen to me? And the doctor was not answering her question at all. She was completely silent. What she was doing was stroking her hair, kissing her face, stroking her ear, and rocking, and keeping her safe, and putting her arms closer and closer across her body. And they rocked. Pourquoi? 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 I don't know how long the rocking went on. I found out after several hours where the doctor said nothing, just sat there and held the girl. What was going on? What was going on is that the silence, again, was being filled by the love of Jesus. Not by our words, not by our cognitive faculties, not by any theological answers. The theology was in the encounter. Jesus went to a place with his disciples, a place called Gethsemane, and said to them, sit there while I go over there and pray. Took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled, and said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. What that doctor was doing was staying there and keeping watch with the girl as her soul was troubled with sorrow unto death. She had lost her identity. She had lost who she was. Her body was now no longer her body. It had been invaded, it had been taken, it had been traumatized, it had been abused by men who had no right to it, and she was in the state where her soul was indeed overwhelmed to the certain point of death. The dislocation of trauma, the disassociation with reality, with all the reality that she'd known up to there, was acute and very deep. Filling the void then, filling the abyss, the silence, the emptiness, the trauma, the darkness, the death, the nothingness, the loss of self, not with theological answers or cognitive responses, but with the presence of Jesus, is sometimes the best way we can serve people in traumatic situations. And it's the hardest thing we can do, because it's time-consuming, because it's draining of us, because it puts us in a position where we too share the trauma at a level we don't want to enter into. But sometimes it's what God is asking of us, and that is our theological response.